Welcome to Dave and Dharm Demystify, a FinTech Futures podcast, helping make sense of the world of FinTech and digital finance. Please sit back and listen as the two Ds take a subject and discuss it to make it clearer and easier to understand.
Demystify.
Welcome everybody to today's show, and we have back with us Sergio Gago from Moody's, and I am so excited because today we're going to be talking about a topic that absolutely fascinates and completely baffles me, and that's quantum computing. So welcome, Sergio. Just in case people haven't listened to the first podcast we recorded with you, which I'm sure everybody has done, could you just briefly introduce yourself and then let's get into quantum computing?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dave. So my name is Sergio. I am the Managing Director of AI and Quantum Computing at Moody's. It's my absolute pleasure to be here again. So thank you for bringing me back. We talked about AI last time, right? So now let's dive into the next horizon, quantum computing.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's start with the absolute basics is what is quantum computing?
All right. So I'm going to try to do this in the time frame that we have, not the usual 4-hour lecture.
And there's no whiteboard. There's no cats in boxes or anything like that.
I'm really happy that you mentioned the cat, right? Because that's what everyone has in their mind when they hear about quantum mechanics and so on, the famous Schrodinger's cat. I think that the way of simplifying this, quantum computers are nothing but a new type of computers. It's a new architecture, a new way of building these devices that can solve mathematical problems exponentially better or faster than our classical normal computers that we have. They use a different type of chip, and instead of bits, they have qubits. But for the sake of the argument, it's just a new way of computing, call it a new type of algorithms, that can solve a barrier that we have today when we try to solve very complex mathematical problems.
Sergio, you mentioned qubits. That's like 4 states, is it? Like a bit is a 1 or a 0, but is a qubit 0, 1, 2, 3?
So the way of looking at this is if a bit is indeed a 1 or a 0, and that is how we measure and store information. We all know bits, bytes, gigabytes, terabytes, and so on. Qubits are something like that, but instead of 2 states, 2 possibilities, 0 and 1, you can imagine it as a whole sphere of possibilities. So imagine the Earth, right? And if the Earth was a bit, you could only be on the North Pole or in the South Pole.
Right.
On a qubit, you can be in Bristol or in San Francisco or in Cape Town. You can be in any position of the sphere, regardless of the information itself. And that, what we call superposition, allows us to do computation exponentially faster because now you can put information in any of those infinite possibilities on the sphere. And that is a qubit.
Wow. Okay. So there's no limitations on essentially the information. It's as broad as you want it to be.
You can store all that information on that qubit and then put your mathematical problem in there. But sometimes people think about qubit in kind of esoteric terms. A qubit is nothing but an electronic type of device. So we can manufacture them. There are different ways of creating those. But even with semiconductors or superconductors, you can do that. The only difference is that most architectures need to be extremely cold. So you need to be in superconducting state. That means that you have to put them almost to 0 degrees. But other than that, they use pretty standard silicon-based materials and so on, with some asterisks, with some notes in there. But generally speaking, there are quantum computers today. They exist. There's quite a few companies manufacturing them, big ones such as IBM and Amazon and Google and some others, but also startups building their quantum computers. And we can use them. Today, you can go into the IBM quantum cloud, create a quantum program, and execute it over the cloud and get things done with a quantum computer. Now, they're still small, the computers. It's almost like computing in the 60s or 70s, when computing had room-sized devices and you could use them just for very simple operations. But now the engineering side of things is making them bigger and better and so on. And the expectation is that we're going to get really big, really usable quantum computers very soon, in a few years from now.
So referencing Moore's law, is quantum computing going to follow a similar path, do you think, in terms of how it works? Or
It is, and I think it's really good that you mentioned Moore's law, because that is the very limitation that we have today. So Moore's law has been this law that Gordon Moore, the back then CEO of this little company that manufactured most of the chips that we have today, right? He forecasted that we would double the amount of transistors that we could put in every chip every 2 years, which effectively got translated into we're going to duplicate every year our computing capacity in our chips. And that was effectively true for decades. We had all our 286 and 386 and 486 and then Pentiums and all that and AMD and blah, blah, blah. So we've been, until we have now smartphones that are thousands of times more powerful than any computer 10 years ago, not to mention high performance computing and so on. But at some point, and this has happened in the last few years, Moore's law has disappeared because it was based on a physical fundamental principle, which is how many atoms can you crumble into one single piece in one single area? How can you make a chip that has as many transistors as possible? Transistor is nothing but a device with a few atoms around. If you're old like me, you may remember those vacuum bulbs.
yeah.
Or if you play guitar and in your amp, you have those vacuum bulbs as well. But of course, nowadays, they are extremely, extremely tiny. You need an electronic microscope to see them. But we have reached the limit on how many atoms we can put in the same place. What happens is that now it's impossible to create more semiconductors in the same area, so we cannot make the chips more powerful in the same space. What have we done? We have put different cores. Like you hear now, like this CPU has 4 cores or 8 cores, and now the computer is much more powerful. And then we parallelize information or problems. Or we invented new algorithms, new ways to maybe scratch a little bit more the speed and what we can do. But even with all this, or even with AI and machine learning, there are certain types of problems that are impossible to solve. One example is solving a Sudoku. A Sudoku, everyone knows that problem. If you get the typical newspaper Sudoku, 10 by 10 square and all that, maybe as a human, you can do it in, 5 minutes or 3 minutes or something like that. A computer can probably do it in a second or so. But if I give you a 40 by 40 Sudoku, so one that would have numbers all the way to 40, there's no computer in the world that can solve that. Neither a human, of course. Every number that you add increases the complexity exponentially, not linearly. So if a Sudoku of 10 by 10 can take the computer 1 second, 11 by 11 it will take 2 seconds, and a 20 by 20 will take minutes or hours, and a 40 by 40 will take years and years. Now, you can say, well, Sudoku is not such a big deal, right? We can deal with it 10 by 10 and call it a day. But we have another mathematical problem that we humans have made ourselves difficult on purpose, which is finding the prime factors of a given number. What do I mean by this? If I ask you, what are the prime numbers that multiplied together give you 21? I'm sure pretty quickly you will say 7 times 3. If I ask you 1,737 and 153, probably you will need a moment or two to give me the prime factors of that. Every number that you add increases the complexity of finding the prime factors exponentially. Right, a nice mathematical trick, you will say. But this happens to be at the core of all the cryptography that we have today. This very podcast is encrypted using this method. And if we find a way to find the prime factors of a number that's 4,000 digits long, so that's quite a number, but still, you can decrypt the internet from a bank transaction, a credit card transaction, or something like that. And as it happens, quantum computers, because the ability of encoding the information that sphere and doing these kind of weird things, can actually do that and solve these problems that a normal computer, no matter how good the CPU is, would take hundreds of years, thousands of years. A quantum computer can do it in minutes.
Well, I mean, just to clarify again, though, when you talked about the chips, etc. So a quantum computer has its own specific, like a quantum chip, right?
Correct.
And does that reside alongside other computer chips, and like we would normally have a CPU, we'd have a graphics processing chip. Now we have an AI processing chip. Is that called an NPU, a neural processing unit, etc.? So for quantum, for solving these huge problems, we'll have something else like a quantum chip. Is that how it will be?
Exactly. We don't know that 100% yet, because as of today, most quantum architectures require being very cold. So some kind of refrigerator. And if you've seen a picture of a quantum computer, this kind of golden chandelier.
Yeah, it look amazing.
That is a very expensive fridge or freezer. The actual quantum chip is a tiny thing at the bottom. All that the chandelier does is decrease temperature all the way to the range of nanokelvin. So no, today you won't have the chip in your motherboard next to your CPU, but I believe that is where we're going. The difference with AI and quantum computing is that quantum is going to be transparent for the user. You will be using your laptop, and then some operations of what you're doing, maybe you're playing a video game, maybe you're using Excel, maybe you're running a financial simulation. Some of those operations will run on your CPU normally, as they've done today. Some of those will run on a GPU, like a machine learning algorithm, and some others will run on a QPU, quantum processing unit, that can analyze this computing problem in a better way.
But I imagine that just like the old computers, this QPU will be just used by big companies first, and it'll be quite a few years before we might have them in our phones or in our laptops, right? Is that really?
I think that is right. And one reason for that is because quantum computing has very niche use cases. It's not something that everyone will be using for everything. You will keep using Excel, using your normal laptop. And a quantum computer is actually not very good at doing algebra or arithmetics. It can do additions and multiplications, but it's not especially good at that. We want to use it for the things that is better than CPUs or GPUs. Quantum computers are really useful for simulating molecules, for example, which is a very interesting problem in pharma for drug discovery. They're really good for logistics problems, how to calculate the optimal route for delivery on your groceries, for example. And the finance industry is really good for optimizing portfolios, which is a combinatorial problem that has almost infinite possibilities, or for doing stress testing of given portfolios or scenarios, or calculating some regulatory capital requirements that banks have all over the world. Like, how do I calculate how many of my lenders can default and how much capital do I need to keep just in case everything goes down? What we call typically Monte Carlo simulations, for those in the know. Quantum computers are really good at that. Playing video games, your GPU does just fine.
I just want to go back to your point around encryption. That talk about how quantum could work with things like AI, but your point on encryption sounds quite scary to me, because if you can have computers cracking all the encryption, that basically renders the entire banking system useless from a security
and all commerce.
And all commerce. So when we hear about the sort of race towards quantum, is it defensive or aggressive, shall we say, in terms of what, I guess, at a kind of national level, countries are sort of thinking about? Just because of that one thing, because that sounds very scary to me.
I think countries at the geopolitical level, they have both. So on one side, they have a lot of programs in the US, but also in Europe. The UK has a really good quantum program that has been released recently. France is at the forefront of it. Australia has been doing good stuff. We know that China is doing a lot of stuff, but not exactly what. So countries are pouring a lot of money to build quantum computers. And then at the same time to build standards to protect themselves from quantum computers. So it is indeed, we're calling this the year to quantum, Y2Q, as a wink to the year 2000.
Right.
through that, which was a massive thing, right? It was supposed to be a massive debacle on the global IT infrastructure. And in the end, it wasn't. But not because it was a fad, but because a lot of people worked a lot prior to it, right? A lot of people spent hours and hours and days really upgrading their systems and all that. I think in a similar level with one big difference. Back then, we knew the deadline. We knew it was going to be December 31st, 1999. But with the year to quantum, we don't know exactly when it will happen. We know that it will happen relatively soon. Today, there is about 30% of the researchers in the community that think that it will be by the end of the decade, depending on the evolution of hardware.
So just not to scare myself too much, but year to quantum, suddenly someone comes up with, oh, we've cracked it. Would that then precipitate a kind of meltdown in terms of the global financial system? Because suddenly everyone's going, God, none of our stuff is safe anymore. I don't want to catastrophize, but I'm just trying to get the context of what might happen.
Well, if most transactions are encrypted, and it means that if somebody can decrypt them, they can modify them in flight. And therefore, the best thing that you can do is switch stuff off so that they can't manipulate the transactions anymore.
Yeah, so that, which precipitates a global financial meltdown.
Correct.
I'm hoping that doesn't happen just before I cash in my pension. Because
Make sure you got paper statements. That's the main thing.
Possibly you don't even have to wait for the black swan moment, because one of the risk principles that we operate on is what we call harvest now and decrypt later. What I mean by this is, well, let's say that we're not going to have a quantum computer big enough to decrypt the internet in the next 10 years, just for saying a number. But storage is virtually free today. And you can actually get all the information from the internet. You could eavesdrop on this conversation, store it, but you will not be able to see what's inside, right? Because it's encrypted. You can just store that in until you get your hands into a quantum computer that's big enough. So do you have, or your government has any information that could be a liability if it gets public in 10 years from now? That is the question that we have to ask ourselves now. What are the liabilities when the quantum computer happens, assuming and understanding that the data is being harvested now, and we know that for a fact.
Wow.
Just this morning, the NIST, the standards agency in the US, so this is really timely, released the new standards for what we all call post-quantum cryptography. So this is basically a new type of encryption algorithm, not the one that's based on finding the prime factors for a number that has served us amazingly well for decades. Now, there's 3 new algorithms that are the new standards against RSA. That's how we call the previous one. So now we have a new standard that's being proposed to the world. And NIST, of course, is US-based, but it's expected that the world will kind of adapt and adopt those standards. These are classical algorithms, not quantum. So it's algorithms that can run on your laptop on any normal standard device, but are known to be resistant to the quantum algorithms that we know today. We call this Shor's algorithm by Peter Shor. He was a researcher at Bell Labs when he created this algorithm. So these algorithms, we will expect to see them rolling out in organizations, definitely in finance, in governments very soon, and then keep updating them as the industry evolves. This was just this morning they were released.
Just also clarify for the audience, because I realized something the other day, because Dave and I both were brought up, I guess not brought up, but we started with the internet in terms of our careers as such. So we kind of understood that, look, when you send an email, then it's secured by this algorithm. And that's the only reason why other people can't see your email. But the fact is that email is not going from me to Dave directly. It's going across hundreds, if not thousands of computers. So they haven't had to go and hack our computer to get us to monitor what we're sending. The data is just traveling around the globe anyway, right? And that's what I don't think still a lot of people don't understand, is that there's all this free-flowing data. The only thing that protects it is these algorithms. So what you're saying is that people are already storing all this data for the day that they can crack all the algorithms, in which case all this data of the past will be exposed. So all of my emails to Dave and my private conversations will be exposed at some point.
That is exactly right. I think that
oh my God.
the best way of picturing this, let's say you're in a coffee shop using their public Wi-Fi. and you visit a website that is not encrypted, so HTTP instead of HTTPS on the address, I could be sitting next door with the software that I have in my computer and see what you're browsing.
Yeah.
Connected to the same Wi-Fi. Now, of course, if you go to your online banking, you would have a secure connection, right? The little green thing on your URL that says this connection is encrypted. If you send a WhatsApp message or any other messaging service, a FaceTime or anything like that, companies or good trusted companies have proper end-to-end encryption mechanisms. That's almost like the wax thing that we used to put on the envelopes back in the old days, in the medieval days, right? You need to know from an encryption perspective that I am the one sending you the message. I need to know that you are the only one who can open my message. And we both need to know that no one has intercepted the message on the way and modified its content, right? Those are the three principles of secure communication of cybersecurity. And what quantum computers are saying is, well, guys, in a few years from now, all that's gone. But we're giving you a head start to come out with new standards and new ways. There are two techniques for this. One is post-quantum cryptography, which is what I just mentioned, a new type of key lock, if you will, that the quantum lockpicks cannot break. That's the best way of picturing it. But it's a lockpick. It's a lock anyways. So someone smart could come with a new type of lockpicks and say, now I can break this as well. And we assume that's going to happen because there's going to be evil actors all the time.
Yeah.
The second approach, that's a little more Horizon 3, is what we call pure quantum communications or quantum key distribution. That is effectively what people calls today the quantum internet, and is using quantum devices to transport the information. You can buy today a quantum communication device. There are a few companies out there. Basically, you put a head end on your side and one on my side, and it uses optic fiber. And then you use quantum mechanics to secure the data. That's unhackable. If you are able to hack that, you will surely get a Nobel Prize. So it doesn't use classical mechanisms. It uses pure quantum mechanisms. Now, the limitation of this is that we cannot repeat the information. We cannot send it over long distances, like 200 kilometers or so. A lot of researchers are working on over the air with satellites, but it's a little bit further away, the quantum internet. So this post-quantum cryptography, which is classical, as I've said, is the present of how to protect ourselves, both in governments and financial institutions.
Blimey. There's a lot to take on there. So kind of switching gears slightly, there's a lot of talk about AI, and we've just done a podcast with you about AI. And one of the things Dharmesh and I have been pondering is the world being a lot more real time, AI being a much better interface in many ways to things like complex financial services. So you talk about quantum's ability to manage and optimize portfolios. That sounds really interesting. So do you see that as kind of quantum starts developing, it will kind of develop hand in hand almost with AI? So the question is more about, as people sit listening to this, can they start thinking about a future in which financial services does start changing, like the idea of AI agents sort of representing individuals and their financial lives or their daily lives, whatever it is, sounds like it could become much more possible, because the actual reality of quantum is it can sift through all the data, do the stuff that you actually really need to make these things useful.
I think that is exactly the world we're heading into. In the short term, I would say every human is going to have an army of agents at their service, whether you're working in a financial institution or any other type of job. So you will have Jiminy Crickets just sitting on your shoulder and helping you make a decision on a given portfolio, make a given investment decision, or giving you real-time access, not to the data, because having access to untethered data is basically having the haystack. What you want to get is the needle, right? You want to get the alpha on what is actually going on. And as humans, we can get so far. We can identify patterns that we do well, but we have two eyes and they look in the same direction. So these AI agents are helping us already really identify everything that's around you and make those connections. What are the correlations? If this company is having troubles in South America, they have this supplier here with this other supplier here with this partner here, which means that this company in Australia is going to default. Make sure you search on that right now. And you identify that way before the signal actually happens, because that pattern is there, hidden in the data. Sometimes you can pick that up because you're a business analyst, you're following that company, you know the company from inside out, and what are their suppliers, what are their exposures, and so on. But you cannot do that with absolutely everything. Like imagine something like, from a supply chain perspective, what happened in the Suez Canal, this massive disruption on the supply chain. How could you quickly identify all the companies that are going to be affected in month 1, 2, 3, 6 by that event? Not only the direct ones, like the actual shippers, but the ones that are really needing to get those containers in order to survive. That is what connecting the dots mean. And you cannot deploy armies of humans to do that. So AI agents are already helping us with that. That's one of the things that we're working at Moody's. We call it the Moody's Army, and it's a product that we're going to put in the market very soon. But the next generation of that is identifying patterns that even standard AI cannot identify. Back into the bit and qubit reference, right? A machine learning system and large language model works in bits. So it has ones and zeros and can identify certain patterns. But if you had the information encoded in everywhere in the sphere that you want, suddenly you can use a quantum computer to find correlations in data that you couldn't find before with classical computers.
In effect, that when you talked about in the AI episode, a vector, that could be a qubit.
It is indeed a way of seeing that, because once you have it vectorized, you have these embeddings, then you can run those through a quantum computer and work with a quantum computer on that. So in machine learning, what we're trying to do effectively is, for many cases, finding the optimal solution. Imagine you have a plot of your country or a given region, and you're trying to find the lowest area possible, the lowest piece in the valley. And you start from one of the mountains. What would you do? You just start walking down until anywhere you go, you actually are going up. So you found a minimum, which is typically the optimal place for your problem. If you have sort of translated your problem into a map, right? A 2D map where you have peaks and valleys. But if you do that in a naive way, yeah, you may be on a valley, but maybe that valley is not the deepest of them all. You just hit a local minimum. If you happen to go through the other valley, maybe the other valley is actually lower. And that is one of the problems that we have with classical machine learning, that we get stuck in a local minima. And yes, there are many mechanisms to avoid that, but quantum computers can solve that like this. There are algorithms that allow you to hit the global minima much better and faster. So you get a better way of optimizing your portfolio, you get a better combination of opportunities, you get a better way of traveling through your graph. Example, if you have a lot of British pounds and you want to make money through Forex, and there's a nice exchange rate with US dollars, what most people would do is go and say, all right, how many US dollars do I get for my pounds? What many banks do is, well, if you buy Singaporean dollars first, and then Canadian dollars, and then US dollars, you can actually get in heads by leveraging the different changes that happen along that route. So you make more money for your buck on going the long route. This is called Forex optimization. Now, the more currencies you add into that graph, the more complex grows. It actually grows exponentially. So a quantum computer can actually help telling you, actually, if you buy these 5 currencies before, you will make a 10% or 5% markup on your currency exchange. So again, it's by finding all those possibilities in an ocean of options that were even AI cannot reach.
I mean, it sounds like quantum's got the capabilities to basically supercharge AI. Do you think it opens the door to artificial general intelligence? I mean, it sounds like it, even if it's not completely self-thinking, it sounds like it would do a pretty good impression of it.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. It can definitely help. Quantum and AI are in different development horizons, right? So quantum is still in its infancy. And that is why companies need to start researching and developing and upskilling their teams on that. AI is in its prime time. So maybe we reach AGI before quantum gets fully developed. But the thing that's really true is that AI can help develop quantum.
Right.
So, for example, one of the challenges that we have today is error correction on our quantum hardware, on the quantum computers themselves. Same as bits, there are errors. When you send a bit through a line, through a piece of optic fiber, sometimes the bit flips and there are errors in the signal, like in any electric signal. But we have really good error correction methods so that when you read a DVD, no one gets DVDs today or CDs, but back in the day, you could scratch a CD and still hear the music. And that is because we have really good error correction mechanisms that even if you're literally throwing away ones and zeros when you scratch it with your key, still you can hear the song. That is one piece that the community is still working on quantum, on error correcting codes on the devices. Well, as it happens, AI can help a lot, is helping a lot doing error mitigation and error correction on quantum computers. So AI is helping quantum develop much faster than we expected. And in turn, quantum is helping AI train models, for example, train LLMs that consume less energy. So it's this kind of snake biting its own tail.
No, I can see it. It's a virtuous sort of circle.
Supply will, yeah.
So what we haven't talked about is, I guess, companies and Moody's and how they've sort of approached quantum. Going back a few years, it was sort of like the thing that everybody needed to do. And, companies were upskilling and getting lots of quantum people in. I think it's gone a bit quiet. So how is Moody's approaching the kind of quantum dilemma?
From our side, we are in a pretty unique position because we're not a bank. We're not an insurance company. We don't optimize portfolios for ourselves. We're neither a quantum company. We don't manufacture our qubits. We'll not have our own quantum computer in our office. So that puts us in a very unique position where we can really drive through thought leadership and go to the financial institutions and tell them, hey, from a cybersecurity perspective, this is the way to go. And from the offensive perspective on how to keep your competitive advantage on portfolios or risk management and so on, this is the way. So what we do is a very application-first approach. We identify use cases that are relevant for the industry, and we map it in a time frame. When do we think this is going to be technically feasible? And we are interested in knowing how many qubits we will need in order to make this a reality. So, for example, we know that in order to run portfolio risk simulations, we need in the order of 800 to 900 perfect qubits. I mean, qubits that don't have errors. And then we can go to the quantum hardware companies and say, when do you guys think this is going to happen? And they say, all right, 2029 or 2032 in a roadmap. Then you can trust them or not, but at least you have a kind of deadline to work with. The second part is training and upskilling. One of the most beautiful things that happened in Moody's when I started the team a few years ago, I sent an announcement saying that we're creating this team on quantum computing. And as it happens, we hire a lot of quants, quantitative analysts in the company, all these mathematicians and physicists that use mathematics to run these mathematical problems today of risk management and so on. And many of them were physicists with a PhD in quantum mechanics and stuff like that. So they raised their hand and said, Sergio, what are you talking about? This was my thesis in the 90s. And I went into finance because that was a good way of making money as a physicist. Are you telling me that these things that were in the brain of a crazy scientist actually exist today? I was like, yes, they do. So these people are my biggest allies. They know their domain better than anyone else, definitely better than me. We act as a bridge, bringing what is possible with quantum today, what the needs of, say, CSIL regulations or Basel III regulations and so on, and what does imply for the underlying mathematical problems. And we have this beautiful partnership that then goes into, okay, this is where we're going to deploy in this product that we have on the shelf, this quantum solution. So we actually deployed a product with that we call the QF Studio, that is basically an algorithm as a service system where you can optimize your portfolio with an API call. And you don't have to worry about a qubit being underneath or where's the fridge that makes the qubit super cold or anything like that. You just say, these are my assets, these are the returns expected, these are the correlations, and and I just want the better and faster way to solve this. I don't care whether it's a quantum computer, AI, or a classical method or anything like that. And then the last pillar of what we work on is obviously, as we've talked about, cybersecurity, not only for our own data, but working with regulators and with our clients on saying, as we've been talking today, there's people eavesdropping to your communications. Assume that they are listening in. They cannot really understand because the data is encrypted, but they will be able to decrypt it in a few years. And very practical team with researchers, of course, is a bit more science and research related. I'm really happy to have both hats on AI and quantum. It opens a lot of doors.
It sounds like they go hand in hand.
I mean, the topics we covered and the position that you're in, Sergio, is just fascinating. I'm envious of your role. Obviously, your intelligence too. But
So, final question. You've got 5 seconds. Explain superposition to me. So that was a joke. This isn't the time or place for that. But
I will define it in 2 seconds the wrong way, but the way people understand it. And I know scientists will jump at me for saying this, but superposition is the ability for qubit of being in several positions or states at the same time. That's it.
yeah, no, I mean, gosh, that sounds like we need that. That's a chat for a beer, basically, isn't it? I was fascinated. I feel like when I think about quantum mechanics, the look of my eyes is the same as my Labrador when she looks at me. She kind of thinks she knows what I'm talking about, but I find the whole thing so fascinating. I was like reading that photosynthesis they think might be a quantum activity, like, and you know that everyone's surprised that like biological systems can use quantum physics because they're not super cooled. You suddenly go, that opens the door to possibilities. The gating factor at the moment is getting things down to cold enough. So
Everything that's tiny is quantum mechanical, but the father of quantum or uncle of quantum, Richard Feynman, and he has a lot of really good books and they are written in plain English. So I would really recommend pretty much all his biography. He said, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you haven't understood anything.
you, well, I must be.
we need to call it a day, but we always knew that talking to you, we could go on for hours. But thank you so much again. I feel like my head's going to explode anyway, but it's been a really insightful kind of episode again. And we look forward to doing more with you. Thank you.
And I think the big lesson from today is print everything off, as you say, Dharm. It's like,
Exactly. Go back.
let's go back to paper. It sounds like there's another existential crisis. So anyway, brilliant. Thank you so much, Sergio.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to Dave and Dharm Demystify. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tune in next time as we take another topic and demystify it.